The world stage is constantly shifting, with numerous significant events unfolding globally. Let's delve into some of these developments. Are you confident your state is immune to transformation? Reconsider your stance. Imagine the next major geopolitical shift isn't driven by internal politics or environmental crises, but by international realignments. Could it be that certain U.S. states are already exhibiting more Canadian characteristics than American ones? They consume Tim Hortons coffee, apologize perhaps a bit too frequently, and might even find themselves cheering for the Maple Leafs hockey team. This phenomenon, however, runs deeper than simple stereotypes. These particular states possess shared economies, extensive borders, and aligning values with their northern neighbor, Canada. As divisions within the United States appear to widen, the concept of secession, once relegated to the realm of science fiction, no longer seems entirely implausible. Could your state potentially fare better by aligning itself with Canada? Let's examine 10 U.S. states that might just find a more suitable home under the maple leaf. We'll explore the evidence and present conclusions at the end of this analysis. Stay tuned. We appreciate you joining us on our channel. Your support is crucial for our growth. Please consider subscribing and hitting the like button if you find this content informative. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our audience around the globe. Starting our list at number 10, Washington. The state is known for its persistent rainfall. Residents often quip that sunshine is merely a legend there. Yet, beneath the overcast skies and verdant landscapes, a curious trend is emerging. Washington, renowned as the hub for tech behemoths and a pervasive coffee culture, is gravitating towards its northern neighbor in ways that extend beyond mere geography or climate. The economic ties are substantial, with annual trade between Washington and Canada exceeding $22 billion. Furthermore, thousands of residents traverse the border each year for work, leisure, or family visits. This constant exchange fosters a sense of shared identity that can sometimes feel more Canadian than American. Vancouver, British Columbia, is geographically closer to Seattle than many major U.S. cities, reinforcing this connection. Culturally, the similarities are striking. One might even describe the relationship as sibling-like. But the political alignment is perhaps the most compelling factor. Here's a significant point. Over 68% of Washingtonians cast their votes in recent elections in a manner consistent with Canadian-style progressive policies. You might be genuinely surprised by how frequently their societal values mirror those found in provinces like British Columbia. Please make sure to watch this video until the very end, as we will be summarizing our findings and drawing important conclusions. What occurs when the lines separating economies begin to fade? When cultural distinctions become less pronounced? When all that remains is a dotted line on a map, signifying a border that feels increasingly arbitrary? Consider this. Would anyone truly register a significant change if Washington state were to quietly shift its allegiance northward? Ask yourself. Moving on to number 9, Oregon. This state is famous for its unique quirks, such as attendants pumping your gas, a service rarely found elsewhere in the U.S. That's emblematic of Oregon's spirit. Distinct, independent, and perhaps subtly Canadian. If you look beyond the surface, you'll discover something more profound. The economic interdependence is undeniable. Over 80% of Oregon's exports find their way to Canada. This isn't limited to traditional goods like lumber and wine. It encompasses the exchange of ideas, lifestyles, and even legislative approaches. Oregon was among the pioneering states to legalize assisted dying, a policy that aligns closely with Canadian law. The state actively protects its forests, prioritizes funding for health care, and consistently pushes for inclusive social policies. These actions reflect values shared strongly with their northern neighbors. But perhaps the most indicative element isn't even policy. Canada itself has engaged in public discussions regarding the possibility of welcoming new territories. Should a segment of the Pacific Northwest ever consider floating across the border, Oregon, with its established connections and aligned values, would likely be at the forefront of such a movement. Does this sound improbable? Consider that just last year, several Oregon counties openly explored the idea of realignment talks, discussing potential pathways to join Idaho, itself a state with complex internal divisions and its own northern border considerations, though the primary discussion was state internal. While the border remains a legal reality, the connection between Oregon and Canada is deeply cultural, economic, and emotional. Therefore, one must pose the question, is Oregon already metaphorically halfway to becoming part of Canada? Number 8 brings us to California. The Golden State is an economic titan, boasting the world's 5th largest economy if considered as an independent nation. That's not a country. It's a single U.S. state we're discussing. California, the land of beaches, technology, and Hollywood glamour. You believe you understand this state, don't you? But what if California's commitment to the United States isn't as steadfast as it appears on the surface? Herein lies the twist. This sun-drenched, sprawling giant might already be operating under its own set of rules, increasingly distinct from federal norms. And Canada? It has certainly been observing these developments closely. You would likely be astonished by the depth of the connections already in place. Trade links between California and Canada account for over $44 billion annually. This relationship isn't confined to goods alone. It extends to shared interests in climate policy, cultural exchange, and collaborative initiatives. California has proactively forged independent environmental agreements with Canadian provinces such as British Columbia and Quebec. This isn't standard federal-to-federal diplomacy. This represents state-to-province engagement, bypassing traditional channels. When California encounters resistance from Washington, D.C. on policy matters, who do you think it consults next? Often, it's Ottawa. Consider this convergence. Both British Columbia and California have enacted aggressive carbon reduction laws, championed healthcare reforms, California's efforts towards universal healthcare echo Canadian principles, and invested significantly in green technology. They don't just think alike. Their strategic planning aligns remarkably. In fact, back in 2018, California's then governor was described by one Canadian minister as being more Canadian than some Canadians. This wasn't mere flattery. It could be interpreted as foreshadowing. There's another layer, the culture. In various parts of Northern California, Canadian brands and tourists integrate seamlessly. Canadians own property here, invest significantly, and even work remotely from the state. The distinction between neighbor and partner is becoming increasingly blurred. If the U.S. were ever to face significant internal shifts or fragmentation, do you genuinely believe California wouldn't weigh its options carefully? Could the Golden State conceivably exchange its stars for a maple leaf? Perhaps not immediately, but one must ask, is it already significantly down that path? At number 7, we find Vermont. Quiet, green, almost excessively peaceful. Yet, beneath the surface of covered bridges and quaint mountain towns, something intriguing is developing. Vermont might just be the most Canadian-feeling state within the U.S., and this sentiment goes far beyond a shared love for maple syrup. Here's a historical tidbit you probably weren't aware of. Vermont once seriously considered joining Canada. Yes, genuinely. During the 1860s, there was open discussion about annexation. While that historical moment passed, fast forward to the present day, and the underlying idea doesn't feel quite as far-fetched as it once might have. Culturally, Vermont closely mirrors the progressive values often associated with Quebec, and possesses the small-town warmth reminiscent of Nova Scotia. Its population, just over 640,000, is smaller than most major Canadian cities, fostering a sense of close-knit community. In recent elections, a significant indicator emerged. Nearly 70% of Vermont voters supported policies more aligned with Ottawa's political direction than Washington's. Then there's the matter of health care. Vermont attempted to implement a single-payer health care system. Does that ring a bell? It's essentially Canada's signature health care model. Although the plan ultimately faltered, not due to lack of desire, but because the state was deemed too small to manage it independently. The ambition itself speaks volumes. Imagine if Vermont weren't operating alone. Even economically, Vermont aligns well with the Canadian model, focusing on small-scale agriculture, clean energy initiatives, and sustainable forestry practices. It operates almost like a province in disguise. Furthermore, let's not overlook geography. Montreal is closer to Montpellier, Vermont's capital, than Boston is. Cross the border, and the environment shifts subtly but noticeably. Bilingual signs appear, customs officers tend to be friendly, and the overall rhythm feels strangely familiar. So, consider this. If Vermont already walks, talks, and values like a Canadian province, what's genuinely preventing it from formally becoming one? Number 6. Massachusetts. They often say the American Revolution ignited here. The Tea Party, the protests, the Revolutionary Fire. Yet more than 2 centuries later, Massachusetts might be subtly nearing the brink of another quieter kind of revolution. And this time, its gaze seems directed northward. You'd be astounded at how much this historically significant state aligns with Canadian ideals in the year 2025. Let's begin with policy. Universal health care stands as a cornerstone of Canadian identity. Massachusetts came remarkably close to achieving this goal independently. It currently leads the U.S. in health coverage, with over 97% of its residents insured, thanks largely to its own state-level system established long before the Affordable Care Act came into existence. Now, consider education. Massachusetts consistently ranks number 1 in the U.S. for its public school system, often drawing comparisons and even serving as a benchmark for provinces like Ontario. Canadian education experts frequently study Massachusetts' system. The parallels don't end at schools and hospitals. The state has aggressively championed climate action initiatives, invested heavily in clean energy, and promoted social equity programs. All priorities that resonate strongly with Canada's national objectives. A revealing 2023 study indicated that cities within Massachusetts scored higher on indicators reflecting Canadian values than some Canadian provinces themselves. This isn't merely surprising, it's historically significant. And here's an often overlooked element: geography and culture. Drive from Boston to Montreal, and the journey takes under 5 hours. Crossing the border often feels less like entering a foreign country and more like visiting a cultural cousin. In fact, over 1 million Canadians visit Massachusetts annually. Many own property, operate businesses, or even attend universities within the state. The flow of people, capital, and ideas across this border is constant and substantial. So the question arises: if a state's values, policies, and even its population demographics align so closely with Canada, how fundamentally American does it remain? Number 5. Michigan. You cross a single bridge, maybe the Ambassador Bridge connecting Detroit and Windsor, and suddenly the accents change. The currency is different, but much feels familiar. Welcome to Michigan, the state with a literal handshake connection to Canada via its unique geography. But here's what many don't fully grasp. That handshake, that connection, has been strengthening considerably over time. Michigan shares an astonishing 721 miles of border with Canada, more than almost any other U.S. state. Detroit and Windsor function practically as twin cities, separated only by the Detroit River and the need for a passport. The economic intertwining is immense. Over $70 billion in trade crosses this border each year, solidifying it as one of the most vital economic links between the U.S. and Canada. However, the bond extends beyond mere financial transactions. Michigan is a state built on industry, much like its neighboring province, Ontario. Automotive manufacturing, a shared legacy, steel production and technological innovation. Also shared economic drivers. The integration is so deep that joint emergency response teams exist between the two countries specifically for the Great Lakes region. You'd be genuinely shocked at how synchronized their operational systems have become. Let's talk values. Michigan voters have recently passed protections for abortion access, legalized marijuana, and committed billions to clean energy investments, all within the last 5 years. Sound familiar? This trajectory closely mirrors Canada's federal policy direction. In fact, a 2024 Regional Values Survey revealed that 52% of Michiganders stated they would prefer a Canadian-style healthcare system over the current U.S. model. That's not a subtle preference. It's a potentially seismic shift in public opinion. And don't forget identity. Residents of Michigan's Upper Peninsula often joke about feeling disconnected from the rest of the U.S. If you ask them about Canada, however, you'll hear tales of weekend excursions to Thunder Bay, fishing trips with relatives across the border, or buying more affordable medications from Ontario pharmacies. It's more than just neighborly, it's personal. So, what happens if political or economic landscapes shift dramatically in America again? What occurs when people start viewing the North not just as a place to visit, but as a potential future? Number 4. Wisconsin. There's an undeniable charm to its frozen lakes, early morning fishing traditions, and the pervasive small-town friendliness that feels, well, remarkably familiar. If it evokes a sense of Canada, you're not mistaken. Wisconsin might be wearing the red, white, and blue, but a closer inspection reveals maple leaves subtly woven into its fabric. You'd be surprised how often this Midwestern state resonates with its northern neighbor. The economic connections are strong, with over $9 billion in annual trade flowing between Wisconsin and Canada. This relationship is particularly robust in sectors like dairy, paper production, and manufacturing. Some businesses in cities like Green Bay and Eau Claire rely more heavily on their Canadian partners than on U.S. suppliers located just a few states away. It's not about geographical distance, it's about economic synergy and fit. And here's a point that might truly surprise you. Wisconsin shares the same latitude as parts of Ontario and Manitoba. In fact, Madison, Wisconsin's capital, is situated farther north than Toronto. It's no wonder, then, that Wisconsin winters often feel more characteristically Canadian than traditionally American. But the similarities transcend weather patterns. They extend deeply into shared values. Recent data highlights a growing majority of Wisconsinites who advocate for expanded healthcare access, investments in clean energy, and robust social programs. Does this sound like a familiar refrain? It aligns closely with Canada's established policy structure. Indeed, a comprehensive 2024 state policy comparison survey ranked Wisconsin among the top 5 U.S. states whose governance models most closely resemble Canadian approaches. Add to this a culture centered around tight-knit communities, progressive farming practices, and a profound respect for public services, and the parallels become even clearer. It's not just theory, it's observable reality. Even cross-border emergency services are often coordinated between Wisconsin and its Canadian provincial neighbors. The bond isn't just geographical, it's functional and cultural. Number 3. New York. Skyscrapers, Wall Street, the dazzling lights of Times Square. Yes, we all recognize the iconic brand. But beyond the famous skyline and the relentless city hustle, New York possesses another dimension, one less visible on television screens. It's a side that's quietly drawing closer to Canada than most people might imagine. Here's the headline you likely didn't anticipate. New York conducts more trade with Canada than with any other single foreign nation, exceeding $35 billion annually. This isn't merely sporadic business, it represents a vital economic artery. With over 500 miles of shared border, including 4 major land crossings, and the renowned Peace Bridge connecting Buffalo to Fort Erie, Ontario, this relationship is inherently structural, not just neighborly. You would be truly amazed at the depth of integration between these regions. In border towns like Buffalo and Plattsburgh, Canadian companies have established significant presences, owning factories, substantial real estate holdings, and integral parts of regional supply chains. Consider Niagara Falls. It's practically shared territory, a testament to the porous nature of the border in this area. With Toronto just a short drive away, many New Yorkers spend more leisure time exploring the north than traveling downstate. But the convergence extends beyond economics and geography. Let's talk values and policy. In 2023, New York enacted one of the most ambitious climate action laws in the United States, legislation that mirrors, almost verbatim, sections of Canada's federal environmental framework. Social programs are expanding, minimum wage is increasing, and public transit infrastructure is growing, modeled partly on the systems seen in Montreal and Vancouver. These are not isolated coincidences. They are points of convergence. Culturally, the crossover is palpable as well. Upstate New York towns frequently host dual citizenship festivals, and countless residents have family ties directly across the border. Language, especially French near Quebec. Media consumption, fashion trends, and even allegiances to favorite hockey teams blur in these borderland areas. A study from 2022 discovered that 1 in 6 upstate New Yorkers identified more strongly with Canadian values than with those prevalent in the southern U.S. So, the ultimate question looms. If the bridge, economic, cultural, political, is already substantially built, who can definitively say which direction it ultimately leads? Number 2. Connecticut. It's polished, subtle, almost blending into the background on a map dominated by larger states and bolder headlines. But don't let its understated presence fool you. Connecticut isn't merely sipping lattes and managing hedge funds. It's quietly positioning itself in ways that align remarkably with its northern neighbor Canada, in ways that might surprise you. And this alignment might wear a symbolic red maple leaf. You'd be genuinely shocked by how much this compact state shares with Canada. Economically, Connecticut is a powerhouse in key sectors like insurance, biotechnology, and green technology, industries that already boast strong, established partnerships with counterparts in Ontario and Quebec. In 2024 alone, Connecticut's trade volume with Canada surpassed $3.2 billion, and this figure is consistently rising. But the real shift isn't just reflected in trade figures. It's evident in policy priorities. Let's examine healthcare. Connecticut maintains one of the lowest uninsured rates in the U.S. and continues to broaden access to care, notably through publicly funded healthcare options, echoing Canadian principles. The state also prides itself on having some of the highest educational standards in the nation, frequently ranked alongside, not below, Canadian provinces in literacy and academic achievement metrics. The values underpinning Connecticut society, emphasis on education, healthcare, and community, find strong parallels in Canada. It's not just policy alignment, it feels culturally resonant. Consider the demographics. There's a noticeable influx of Canadian retirees choosing tranquil Connecticut towns for second homes, attracted by the climate, accessible healthcare, and the overall pace of life. What makes Connecticut particularly intriguing is its inherent adaptability. It possesses the capacity to blend seamlessly into various systems. Should political climates shift, economic alliances recalibrate, or questions of national identity arise, Connecticut is well positioned to navigate these changes smoothly and quietly. This isn't because it's inherently rebellious, but because it's strategically prepared. So, ask yourself, could one of the smallest states in the U.S. potentially make one of the most significant geopolitical moves in the future? And finally, number 1. Montana. Rugged, vast, untamed. But beneath the majestic mountains and wide-open landscapes, Montana is nurturing one of the most compelling cross-border relationships in North America, a connection most people are entirely unaware of. Montana doesn't simply border Canada. In many ways, it feels like an extension of it. Sharing over 540 miles of border, this state has more direct crossings with Canada than almost any other. This geographical intimacy fosters deep ties. In numerous remote areas, towns on either side of the border rely on each other more significantly than on their own distant state or provincial capitals. You'd be shocked how often border residents casually mention popping over to Alberta for supplies or services, saying things like, "We just go to Alberta for that." And this interdependence isn't limited to local residents. Montana engages in billions of dollars of trade with Canada annually, particularly in crucial sectors like energy, lumber, and agriculture. Certain regions are heavily reliant on Canadian infrastructure for essential power and water flow. In fact, cross-border emergency services are already coordinated between Montana and its neighboring Canadian provinces. This isn't hypothetical, it's happening now. Even the economies exhibit striking parallels. Canada's focus on natural resources and environmental stewardship aligns perfectly with Montana's identity and economic base. Culturally, the shared values are undeniable. Hunting, fishing, ranching traditions, and a strong spirit of self-reliance resonate deeply on both sides of the 49th parallel. These aren't just neighbors. They are reflections of each other. A revealing 2024 regional value poll showed that over 60% of Montanans expressed a preference for local governance over federal oversight, and nearly 1 in 5 stated they felt a stronger connection to Alberta than to the U.S. East Coast. This sentiment isn't insignificant. Imagine living in a town geographically and culturally closer to Calgary than to your own state capital. Your daily life is interwoven with Canadian roots, your goods are priced in both currencies, and your core values mirror those of the province across the line more than a city across the country. At what point does the border become just a line on the map, and the feeling of shared identity take precedence? So, there we have it. 10 U.S. states exhibiting tendencies that draw them closer to Canada than perhaps anyone anticipated. From the tech-savvy Pacific Northwest to the rugged terrain of Montana, from the polished charm of New England to the economic bridges spanning the Great Lakes, one thing becomes evident. Borders are more than just geographical lines. They represent complex webs of economic interdependence, shared cultural values, and aligning political priorities. Some of these connections are historical. Others are rapidly evolving. It might be driven by trade, facilitated by culture, or perhaps propelled by the quiet allure of shared values and governance styles. Whatever the underlying reasons, the question persists. If these states already think like Canada, work with Canada, and in many ways, live like Canada, what truly anchors them as unequivocally American? If you found this exploration thought-provoking, please do us a favor. Subscribe to our channel, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with others. Let's encourage more people to ask these important questions, to recognize the hidden connections shaping our continent, and to think beyond conventional borders. This conversation is far from over, and neither are the compelling stories we aim to bring you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.